Fire Emblem is a special series to me. I'm sure if you know me at all, you already know that, but if you don't, then allow me to elaborate. Pikmin 3 is my favorite game of all time, bar none, and the other 3 main series entries are pretty high up on that list as well. But yet, I will usually say that Pikmin isn't my favorite series, and that would be because the title belongs to Fire Emblem. And that's because of the 17 mainline entries in the series, I love around 9 or 10 of them, and at least decently like the rest of them. It's just a series that is so consistent to me in the amount of enjoyment I get from the general gameplay loop that all the games feature, and the obsession runs pretty deep. I think if I took a quiz to name all the playable characters from every game off memory, I could get at least 85%. You know what? Fuck it, let's do it. Here's the score I got on screen right now. But anyway, my point is that I am obsessed with the Fire Emblem franchise, and to a lesser extent, that also applies to the first game in the series, Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon, and the Blade of Light. Being the first game in the series and the first of many appearances for series mascot Marth, FE1 obviously laid a lot of the groundwork for what Fire Emblem would become, but it definitely features a lot of kinks that would eventually be ironed out. Fire Emblem 1 first debuted on the Funny Wheat Day in 1990 as a Japanese exclusive Famicom release, where it stayed for over 30 years, until in 2020 when Nintendo re-released it as a limited-time digital-only release similar to Mario 3D All-Stars. And if the intro to this video didn't make it clear enough, I obviously bought this and will be the version I'm playing for this video. The cool part is that they also released this in a collector's edition format that included an art book and this cool NES cartridge with the original sticker of the game on it made completely out of glass. Now unfortunately the game itself is still just the digital code, but it's still really cool nonetheless. The story segment of this video is going to be unlike any of the videos I have done before, because by the fact that it is an RPG, Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon, and the Blade of Light is a heavily story-focused game that drives the actions of the player forward. Being an RPG, the story is fairly complex and features a lot of different places and faces that make up our journey, but at the same time it's still an NES game, so most of this is conveyed to us through a few disjointed text boxes in between chapters, and even the entire prologue of the game isn't told to us until about chapter 7. Because of this disjointed nature, a lot of the in-between details need to be interpreted somewhat, so I'm going to do my best to tie all the pieces together to give a summary of the game's events as I understand them in the most straightforward way possible. Our story begins 100 years ago as the evil shadow dragon Medius and his Dolor Empire begin a plot to take over the entire continent of Arcanea. Things looked bleak until a king of the small nation of Altea named Henri rose up to the dragon's tyranny. Henri took up the Blade of Light known as the Falchion, the only weapon in the land capable of defeating Medius, and with it he did just that, slaying the beast, and with their leader gone, the Dolor Empire collapsed. But now, a century later, Medius has revived with the help of the dark wizard Garneth, a tyrant who violently took over the mage capital of Khadin. Together with the help of the nations of Grust and Macedon, the evil ones set out to rule the continent once again. To oppose the evil faction, the current king of Altea and descendant of Henri, Cornelius, sets out with the falchion in hand along with the neighboring ally of Gra to slay Medius as his ancestor once did. As the king and his men approached the enemy armies, Gra suddenly sprung a surprise attack, betraying their once ally to join the empire. Caught off guard, the king and his entire accompanying army were slaughtered. Cornelius had died and the falchion fell into the hands of the empire. Back at Altea Castle, Gra invades, and with no one left to defend, the castle is overtaken easily, and in the process the queen is killed and the princess Elise is captured by Gra. And due to a distraction by the princess, the young prince Marth was able to escape to a nearby ally, the small island nation of Talus. Marth spends a few years there training and maturing, which brings us out of our prologue into the story featured in the main game. The game begins with Sheeta, the princess of the aforementioned Talus, flying on her Pegasus to request aid from Marth and his knights to help with an invading bandit force. Marth embarks with his trusted advisor Jagan and his junior knights Cain, Abel, Gordon, and Drog to defeat the bandits and recruit the humble curate Riss along the way. The Talesian king thanks us and wishes us well on our journey to the nearby ally of Aurelius, whom Marth hopes will be able to aid in the fight against Medius. The king also entrusts us with some of his best men, the mercenary Ogma and his axe triplet subordinates Barst, Bord, and Cord. On their way to Aurelius, Marth and company defeat a few more groups of bandits, in the first bout recruiting a kind-hearted pirate named Daros, a money-desperate hunter named Castor, and in the second they save a reformed thief Julian, a sister of the cloth Lena, and Sheeta is able to sway an edgy swordsman named Navarre to their side. Upon reaching Aurelius, but before reaching the main Aurelian army, the Altean army is accosted by a group of Macedonian knights, whom they defeat, gathering Lena's knight brother Mathis and Marth's best friend and young prodigal mage named Merrick. After defeating the foes in front of them, the Altean army finally unites with the main force of Aurelius, led by the king's younger brother Duke Hardin and his men Wolf, Sedgar, Roche, and Violent, as well as a bishop named Wendell. Together, the combined force storms and retakes Aurelius Castle from the occupying Macedonians, rescuing a jailed thief named Rickard along the way. After the battle, the last surviving member of the royal family of Arcanea, Nina, arrives and bestows upon Marth a fire emblem, the royal family's treasure and the symbol of the continent's hero. The now bolstered Altean force sets out to reclaim both Arcanea and Altea from the Empire's grasp. The group decides first to head for Arcanea to free their large military force that is being held captive. While on the run from the Empire, the Altean force encounters a Grustian force featuring the Princess of Macedon, Minerva, and her White Wing Squadron, who seem to take issue with the commanding general's tactics and shortly perform an unauthorized retreat. Marth and company storm and take the fort while recruiting Bantu, an old Manakee capable of transforming into a powerful dragon with the use of a firestone. Onward with their march, Marth's army seizes both the small port of Warren and the Manakete nation of Pyrathi, recruiting the mercenaries Caesar and Rad, the Grustian knight Roger, as well as the Arcanian sniper George along the way. Shortly after, one of the White Wing squadron, Catria, implores Marth to rescue Maria, Minerva's sister and another princess of Macedon, from Grustian captivity so that Minerva can defect to our cause. Marth does just that and saves Maria from captivity, which prompts Minerva to approach the prince and turncoat to the Altean army out of gratitude and a sense of justice. Marching forward to the Arcanian capital, Marth recruits the Nepo baby mage Lind and the simp ballistician Jake and enters the castle. Inside, they release the Arcanian knight squadron of Medea, Tomas, Dolph, Macellan, and Boa, and with the extra help, they manage to take back the castle, and with many thanks from Princess Nina, Marth now sets out to reclaim his birthrights of Altea and the Falchion. On the way back home, the group defeats the Grustian ballista army and recruits Medea's lover Astrum and another ballistician of their own with Beck. In search of the Falchion, Marth's army invades the capital of former Altean ally Gra. Here, they defeat the treacherous King Joel and recruit two of the White Wing sisters, Palla and Catria. However, upon seizing the throne, it's discovered that the Falchion is nowhere to be found. The group suspects that the sword now resides in the hands of the evil sorcerer Garnov, so the group travels north of the magical desert of Kadeen to retrieve it. The Alteans make their way to the desert to confront Garnov, but he is invincible due to his dark magic Mhulu. Garnov eventually grows bored of the encounter and warps away, challenging Marth to come find him. Afterwards, the great sage and Garnov's former master, Goto, informs Marth that the only way to defeat Mhulu is to use the light magic spell Starlight. Goto tells Marth that he can bring him both the Star Orb and the Light Orb to his location in Macedon so that he can forge the special tome. With neither of these in his possession at the time, Marth decides to head back to retake Altea for now as he gathers the necessary materials to defeat Garnov and Medius. Back in Altea, Marth's army storms the castle gates, recruiting either the paladin Aaron or the hero Samson depending on which warring village you decide to visit, and also freeing the shape-shifting Manakete Zane. Inside the castle, Marth dashes through the halls to the throne room to slay the mage dragon Morzis, who both killed his mother and handed his sister over to Garnov. With the foes inside defeated, Marth finally liberates his homeland, much to the joy of all the citizens. But the job isn't finished. The spirited Altean army must now set off for the Fane of Ramen to procure the Star and Light Orbs that Goto has requested they bring him. However, on the way, the group is accosted by a unit of the elite Grustian cavalry known as the Sable Order, but with the help of the final White Wing sister S, they are able to defeat the soldiers and reach the Fane intact. Inside, Marth, with the help of Bantu, rescues a brainwashed Manakete princess, Tiki, from Garnov's clutches, and recovers both orbs and shifts off for Macedon to meet with Goto. But to get to Macedon, they must first go through the heart of Grust, where at the capital they meet with Camus, the Sable Knight that Nina has been telling us about this whole time. Nina recognizes that Camus is a good man stuck in a tough situation, as he was the one that kept her safe and eventually released her from her Dollar imprisonment. She pleads desperately with Camus to surrender, but he declines, citing that he would rather die on the battlefield under his own country's banner than betray his homeland. To the dismay of both Marth and Nina, Camus is slain with the help of the turncoat Grustian general Lorenz, and thus the Grustian forces collapse alongside their commander's fall. With heavy hearts, Marth's forces push on to Macedon to defeat the advanced squadron sent after them, afterwards clashing with Maria Minerva's brother, the usurper king Michaelis. With harsh words for his sister still lingering, Michaelis is slain, and Marth delivers the orbs to Goto in a nearby village, where he is able to craft the legendary Starlight Tome, and the group finally obtains the means to defeat Garnov. The army's penultimate march takes them north of Kadeen to Garnov's hideout in the Thebes Tower, where the mages of Marth's army use the Starlight Tome to break through Garnov's defenses and finally lay the Dark Pontifex to rest. And towards the back of the tower, they manage to recover both the Falchion and Marth's sister Elise unharmed. With only one more goal to accomplish, the group marches to Dollar to confront Medius, slaying his minions along the way. Inside the castle keep, the army, with the help of Goto, fight back waves and waves of enemies until Marth is finally able to get close enough to strike down the Dark Dragon with the Sword of Light, ending this conflict once and for all. Once defeated, Medius declares that as long as darkness dwells in the hearts of man, he will be reborn again and again till the end of time. But that is a problem for another day, as Marth can finally rest after a brutal 3-year-long conflict that ravaged the entire continent, as he and Sheeta return to Altea together to spend the rest of their days. Alright everyone, we can breathe now. 1700 words later, we have our rough summary of the story of the first Fire Emblem game, and honestly, I think it's a pretty solid attempt for such an old console. Typically, games at the time would maybe give you a few paragraphs at the beginning and end, with maybe a few in between if you're lucky, but here FE1 gives you plenty of information about the ongoing events and the world that they occur in. And not even only plot centralized stuff, but also plenty of flavor text, like character interactions during recruitments and village conversations that provide even more info. For what it had to work with, I think Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light delivered a very solid story with a compelling backstory and motivation for our main character. And now it can be a little jumpy in terms of locations especially, but overall it maintains a fairly consistent through line until the very end. In my opinion, the graphics of FE1 are some of the best on the NES. The maps are simplistic enough to take in all the information at a glance and also remain detailed enough so that you can tell specific details like the class or affiliation of a unit easily, or what type of terrain tile you're standing on. And of course, as has always been a staple for the franchise, the battle sprites look fantastic and are super detailed to boot, especially in comparison to the map sprite work. Plus, the animations are super bombastic and over the top that brings just enough spice to keep up the excitement in the anime chess environment. The character portraits are also hilarious. They look so stupidly simple. In particular, Dolphin Magellan's tooth-out sprite always kills me. But you can kinda tell they were just running out of either time or space designing these, because many of the units actually share portrait sprites but just recolored, like Seger and Wolf here. But the worst defense of this is Gordon and Tomas literally being the exact same portrait color and all. Overall, I'd say the music of FE1 is pretty solid. Certainly not the best the system had to offer, but I'd say very high up on the list. You've got classics like the recruitment themes of Together We Ride and Knight's Oath, and of course the battle and map themes are fantastic as well, like the boss theme being this menacing bass forward dun 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 sound that fits perfectly. There are some stinkers too though, like the Near Victory theme, which is actually a really good song, but then they decided for some reason to overlay a constant high-pitched backing sound that just ruins the song in front of it for me. I, in general, like the beeps and boops of classic songs, but sometimes they just make them so grating that it ruins the experience for me. In the past, I've heard the gameplay of Fire Emblem described as anime chess, and to be honest, it's kind of hard to disagree with that. The basic premise is that you move your pieces, or in this case units/characters, around on a rectangular grid to defeat enemies in turn-based combat. Now, it is a little more complex than that, with far more variables like character stats and the such thrown into the mix, but at its core, it's a pretty good description. As I mentioned previously, you will have your own unique army of colorful friends, all with their own unique stats to set each other apart, meaning each character has their own internally set base stats as well as stat growth rates that will always be the same on a new playthrough. Growth rates are simple to understand. They just represent the percentage chance that character has to level up this specific stat upon leveling up. For instance, Marth has a 50% speed growth, so upon leveling up, the game will run an RNG check to see if he gets a stat increase for that level. Each character has their own unique growth rates, but generally they will mirror what their class wants to do. For instance, mercenaries like Ogma and Navarre will have high skill and speed growths but low defense growths, and armor knights like Drog or Roger will have high defense growths but low speed growths. Base stats are a little bit more complex, where both the character and their class have base stats that total up to their actual base stats. For example, Abel the Cavalier starts with 6 strength and the Cavalier class has a base strength of 5, meaning that Abel's character base strength is 1. For comparison, Cain the Cavalier starts with 7, meaning his actual base strength is 2. As mentioned earlier, there are a variety of different classes that are in-function archetypes or jobs that your units are assigned to fit different niches. To go back to the chess comparison, think about how your knight and your bishop fill different roles on your board. In Fire Emblem's case, you have your armor knights that are strong defensively and are meant to plug up a choke point, or take on several enemies without worry of defeat. Or your mercenaries that are basically enemy delete buttons who do tons of damage but can only take a few hits before going down. Or your cleric who should realistically never see combat but are still vital to keep the army running. My point is that every class has its own unique purpose. And while the level cap is 20 for a given unit, once they hit level 10, most classes are able to use their class-specific promotion items to change into their advanced tier 2 class, which will grant them a stat bonus and reset their level to 1, which gives them more opportunity for further growth. Another distinction between the classes are types of weapons that they can use. In Shadow Dragon and Blade of Light, we have 6 main weapon types: swords, lances, axes, bows, magic, and staves. They all have different variants with their own unique stats, such as iron, steel, or silver swords all having different damage, hit, and weight stats respectively. And because of that, weight stat is the reason why swords are by far the best weapon type in the game, because they will always weigh lighter than their axe or lance counterparts and have better hit, but at the cost of some damage, but they end up being the only type of weapon that can consistently double attack enemies because of a calculation I'll talk about later. Meanwhile, magic and bows are in their own little universe of niche usability, being that they are able to attack at range or range and melee distance for magic. And typically, to circumvent this balancing issue in later games, there is a rock, paper, scissors style mechanic where swords gain a boost over axes, axes over lances, and lances over swords, called the weapon triangle, but that is not present here in the first entry. So it just ends up being that the best option is to always use a sword, especially when there are even specialty styles of swords like the rapier, armor slayer, killing edge, and levin sword to fill in whatever niches the other weapons could possibly be needed for. And to further highlight Sword's dominance, we can take a look at the stats and how they work to get into the raw numbers of it all. Now bear with me as this section is going to get really nerdy and math heavy. Each character has a total of 8 stats that they have to worry about gaining: HP, strength, skill, speed, weapon level, luck, defense, and resistance. All of which cap out at 20 points except for HP, which I think caps at 52. I couldn't really find a solid answer for that one. HP is pretty self-explanatory. It represents the amount of damage you can take before dying, same as any other RPG. Strength is used to determine damage by by calculating the attacking unit's strength plus the might of the equipped weapon minus the defending unit's defenses, which will let you know how much physical damage you will do. Magic weapons work a bit weird in this game, whereas in later games there is a dedicated magic stat that functions the same as strength, but in this game it is solely determined by the might of the tome that you are using. And instead of defense, this calculation will use resistance, which is just effectively magic defense, which in the early days of Fire Emblem is a very weird stat. Most units in the game, enemy and ally alike, will have 0 resistance and 0% growth, so they will never get a point of resistance, save for maybe a few magic units in the final boss. So you just end up doing true damage with your mages, but unfortunately you can never do more damage than the might of the weapon, and magic is generally pretty accurate, so you can at least get off consistent damage with it. The only way for a unit to increase their resistance is either through the permanent stat boosting item, the Talisman, or the temporary boosters in the Pure Water and the Barrier Staff. Speed, skill, and luck are all kinda bundled together in what they do, so I'll talk about all of those simultaneously, but there is an exception for speed to go over first. Attack speed is the calculation used to determine how many times a unit will attack in battle. It's found by just taking the unit speed and subtracting the weight of the weapon from that value, and the resulting number is your attack speed. To put it simply, the unit with the higher attack speed value will attack twice in a given battle, and the other unit will only attack once. And if the numbers are equal, then both units will only attack once. And this loops back to my earlier point about sword dominance, being that they are the latest melee range weapon type, and sword users like Ogma, Marth, and Navarra generally have some of the highest speed stats in the game. They will almost always double attack, resulting in big damage, whereas axes are all super heavy, and you pretty much are never going to double with them. But attack speed isn't everything, as you still have to actually hit the enemy before doing any damage. And that is where the combo of skill, speed, and luck come into effect. Alright, buckle up and get your notebooks out for this one. To determine the unit's hit rate, you must find the attacking unit's hit and the defending unit's avoid. Hit is found by adding together the unit's skill times 2 plus luck divided by 2 plus weapon hit minus terrain bonus, and avoid is found by using the unit speed plus luck, with the hit rate just being hit minus avoid, at which point the game rolls a number from 0 to 99 to determine if you actually hit the enemy or not. Our final stat is weapon level, which is a really weird stat that only gets used in Fire Emblem 1 and 3, eventually being replaced by weapon ranks in future games, but for now it determines what weapons you are able to use, as your unit's weapon level needs to be equal to or higher than a weapon's assigned level for them to use it. For example, you need a weapon level of 9 to use the Silver Sword. The reason I say it's weird is because it becomes fairly pointless after a point, as you will mostly be using silver weapons as your weapon of choice, and the highest level for any of those is axes with 10. So really anything after level 10 is pretty pointless outside of a few magic tomes and special royal weapons. Alright, enough of the nerdy shit. It's time to put the stats into practice and do some good old-fashioned death battles. As I said earlier, the meat of this game takes place on grid-based maps, on which you can move your units up to an amount of tiles based on their class's assigned amount. Battles consist of both player phase and enemy phase, in which all units from either army are able to expend their movement to either attack or complete an objective or simply just move forward toward the enemy. Upon initiating a battle, a small scene will play out depicting the attacks of the battle. The player doesn't have any input here, and they are just for show while the game calculates the damage. And upon a unit's HP dropping to 0, they disappear from the map for good. Oh, and don't forget, that includes your guys too. And that brings me to one of Fire Emblem's marquee features, being that of so-called Perma Death, where if any of your units die, they are gone for good. Unless, of course, you do reload your save and start the chapter over. Typically, the latter is how I play Fire Emblem, because I get way too attached to the effort I put in to raise my units up, and I really can't let that go. But I have done a few permadeath runs, and that extra thought that needs to go into those can be a lot of fun as well. And your units staying dead was the intent of the series creators, and that can really be seen in the way they design the characters. The game incentivizes you to hold on to your early units by making them the best stat-wise. For instance, Cain and Abel generally end up being better than Medea or Aaron, who you get several chapters later, and the same can be said for Ogma and Navarre in comparison to Astrum and Samson. This is due to higher base stats and growth and more time to get levels before recruitment. The idea of this is basically to give you lesser replacement units in case you mess up and lose the ones from the start. The replacements are fully serviceable, but at least a tier below the others. Every single map in the game has the exact same main objective, to defeat the boss and have Marth seize the throne or castle gate that they reside on. In later entries in the series you will see a more varied list, but not in our first journey. There are also several different side objectives to tackle as well. The main type will be villages that also have to be visited by Marth alone. Inside you might get gold, new items, weapons, or even sometimes a brand new character. On the item front there are also doors and chests that can be unlocked by thieves with the Master Key item, and chests can also be opened by Marth after he obtains the Fire Emblem item after Chapter 6. With chests you do have to be quick sometimes, as enemy thieves can appear and steal the treasures within and run away before you're able to defeat them. For a game from 1990, the AI is actually pretty well done. The enemies will generally either prioritize doing the most damage possible, or if there is a kill available to them, they will always go for it if in range. Now, enemy phase is significantly slower because the AI has to process each unit's movement for about 2 seconds in between each other. Now, this above is all true unless our baby blue boy is around, because for some reason in this game, every enemy will always target Marth should he be in range of them, even if they could kill another one of your units instead. Because of this, Marth weirdly ends up becoming one of your best units because he has solid growth rates and will inadvertently steal a lot of experience points just by existing and killing things. And you will need him to defeat the final boss, so this is for the best, honestly. I really love using Marth as a beacon to save another unit I messed up and got into a dangerous spot, or using him to draw some enemies from a choke point to free a path for my other units to charge forward. The inventory system in this game is fucked up. There's no other way to describe it. Each character can hold up to 4 items at a time, and if they receive another item via an enemy drop, it will be sent to the convoy. The convoy is a 40 space bank of items that you aren't currently using that any character can pull out if they are on a convoy tile on any given map, and you can buy new items at the armories or shops. But the fucked up part is the inventory management. In later Fire Emblem games, you can free trade between units, swapping whatever items you so desire. But in FE1, it's a little more complicated. You have to trade by selecting the giving unit and trading the item to the receiving units, but the receiving unit cannot initiate the exchange, which makes it super tedious to rearrange inventories between 2 units if one is already moved. And if the receiving unit has 4 items, you can't trade because their inventory is technically full. It's just extremely annoying and slows the game down so much just to do something so simple. The map design of Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light is kinda just fine gameplay-wise. There are some strong maps like the first map, Chapter 6, Chapter 17, or 22. But then some maps are miserable to slog through for reasons I'll mention later, but for some of the lowlights there are Chapter 7, Chapter 15, Chapter 4, and the final chapter, which is bad for a separate reason than the others. In terms of visual clarity between the different types of terrain, it's very clear where you can move your units in terms of being able to tell if the terrain is crossable or not. However, unlike in future games, this game does not show you movement ranges for your own characters or the enemies, so you kinda just have to guess where units will end up sometimes. And following on the negative Nancy train, let's talk about the absolute worst aspect of the first Fire Emblem. That being that it is slow. I'm talking slower than the amount of time it takes me to finish one of these videos. This is for 2 reasons. First, in the literal sense where the animations, while good looking, take forever to play out. The character movements and camera scroll of the map is very slow, and as I mentioned earlier, the AI having to think before every single movement also adds on about a minute each turn on average in some of the later levels. The second reason is by far the more egregious of the 2, that being that the game only moves as fast as Marth does. Every single objective related to positions on the map has to be completed by Marth. In particular, Marth is the only one who can visit villages, and Marth is generally the one who recruits new units, save for a few exceptions. And most importantly, Marth is the only one that can seize castles, meaning that the chapter does not end until Marth reaches the throne. So it creates this weird situation where Marth is being pulled in 3 different directions at once, which can lead to one of your best combat units being sidelined for most of the battle as he runs off to a village in the middle of nowhere to get 10,000 gold or something. And then he has to complete a cross-country race back to the castle while your units that have already killed every enemy just sit there and wait for him. Now, there are maps where this isn't as bad, see like Chapter 3 or Chapter 22, since the side objectives for Marth are along the path to the castle and are easily accessible and only waste about 1 turn to hit on the way. But then there are chapters like Chapter 7, where it's a very vertical map where Marth has to go into one alcove to get Bantu out of the village, and then head back all the way back around the horseshoe shape and end up down at the bottom of the map to seize the castle. It's just such an asinine design that makes no sense, and it takes Marth forever to move that far. The speed of this game is honestly one of the main reasons I don't revisit it much. If you plug these maps into a modern Fire Emblem engine, then you could beat the game in about 1/3 of the time this requires, just purely from the gameplay mechanic optimizations. It started to get so unbearable that you may notice from like Chapter 10 onward that all the footage features the switch ports built in 2x speed mode just so I could beat the game in a semi-timely manner. Before we end this crazy ride, I want to highlight the final chapter in specific, because holy shit, this chapter is ridiculous. To start, your army is split into 4 different separated groups that have no way to easily link with each other. Plus, there are a ton of enemies that will constantly swarm you, and not easy stuff either. I'm talking Manicheets, high defense ballisticians, and silver bow snipers that hit like a truck. This map nearly feels impossible sometimes, and that's before we mention Medius himself, who is only able to be damaged effectively by Marth with the falchion. Otherwise, you need an extremely powerful weapon with a maxed out strength stat to even do a few damage to him, but aside from the falchion, he is near invincible. And to top that off, Marth spawns on the exact opposite side of the map from Medius, which again brings the slow pace of this game to the forefront, because you're so much better off just using the warp staff to get to the boss room in a reasonable amount of time. After the final battle, we get a staff credit text roll, but following we get a now staple of the franchise with these little character cards for every single playable character that you recruited, that either tells you what they got up to after the war or what chapter they died in your playthrough. These things are so damn charming, and once characters begin to have paired endings in future titles, you can get even more interesting results for the characters you spent this whole time raising up. Here in the first game, you mostly just get a simple sentence or two, but still really cool nonetheless. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light is certainly one of the games of all time. Is it a good game? I honestly don't know the answer to that. Obviously, looking at it in a vacuum, it shows its immense age and the problems that can be found within, like its slow speed and pacing, lack of a modern battle and trading interface, and general simplicity in storytelling and character design. And even if you put it into the perspective of being a game from 1990, I don't even know if it could be considered to be a good consumer experience at the time either. If I wasn't already a veteran of the much easier to understand later entries in the series, I really think I would be lost here. There's just so much information that isn't told to you that you just have to piece together, especially stuff like movement ranges, weapon stats, or even what weapons your characters can use. I think being a pre-existing superfan of the Fire Emblem franchise, I am able to appreciate this game for what it was. A simple start to something that would grow into the awesome franchise that I know and love today. But taking my fan hat off for a minute, there is absolutely no reason to play this game unless you are a fan of the series, and even then, it's debatable. For modern gaming standards, FE1 is a slow and confusing experience that I think will be a positive one once you begin to understand the mechanics, but you have to clear that high hurdle first. And it's hard to even recommend doing that when this game has a 2011 DS remake that fixes the speed and clarity issues completely by implementing modern FE mechanics for the game's time of release. And while that version certainly has its own issues, it is absolutely the definitive way to play Marth's first adventure. But for me, I am more than happy to talk about the franchise that is forever etched into my brain, no matter which entry it is. Except for Three Houses. But if by some miracle you've also played this version of FE1, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. And if you want me to cover more Fire Emblem games in the future, let me know which you'd like to see. As I've made clear, I'm more than willing to talk about any entry. Thank you so much for making it this far into the video, and I hope you can take the time to like, comment, and subscribe. It really means a lot to me. But as always, this has been Doddboy, and I hope you have a wonderful day.